To get the most out of this video, listen to the introduction to understand what is going to happen astrologically this week and when it will occur. Then use the timestamps in the description box or comments section below to go to your sun, moon, and rising signs to see how things will generally affect you. This is a general read of the astrological energies that will be playing out this week. For a specific assessment of how the planetary energies will affect you personally, I would suggest getting a reading with a professional astrologer. You can do so with me through the Guiding Star Astrology website. If you're new to astrology, you are so welcome on this platform. If you would like to learn to read your own astrology chart, you can do a short, fun course with me for $35 Australian. The link is in the description below. Thank you to all my YouTube subscribers and my Patreon family members. Without you, this video and its message would not be possible. Hello, I'm Kesenya, and welcome to this series that I've been preparing for you all about Neptune and Neptune's transits through every house in the horoscope and how it will affect your life. Now, I've been wanting to do this series for quite some time now. However, I decided I'd wait until Neptune had crossed my ascendant and my first house lord. In doing so, there's a strategy behind this. I wanted to see how Neptune would play out in my life on those very significant and key points in my chart. Astrology is 50% reading books and doing courses and getting mentors and teachers, and the other 50% is observation and experience of the planets in your life. So the older you get, the more wisdom, the more knowledge that you will have about how planets impact us. So now that I've gone through those particular transits of Neptune in my first house, I feel that I'm ready to talk more in depth about this very watery planet. So let's start by having a look at what Neptune is all about astronomically. So Neptune comes after Uranus in the order of the planets. We have Mercury, Venus, the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, boom, Neptune. Second to last of the key players in astrology. Pluto is still considered to be a planet of influence in astrological circles, and therefore Neptune is the second last. Now, when Neptune was discovered, it wasn't through observation. They didn't sort of spot Neptune in the sky and go, aha, there it is, because you actually need a telescope to see Neptune. It's not something you can observe with the naked eye. And so Neptune was discovered through mathematics. Basically, the astrologers of the time when Neptune was discovered, and we're going to talk about that when Neptune was discovered in just a minute, but the astrologers of the time were observing Uranus, and they had mathematically predicted where Uranus was going to go according to all their observations, and then Uranus did his usual quirky thing and did not follow the predicted orbit. And so from that, they were able to calculate that there must be a planet further out that's pulling on Neptune, and its gravitational force has caused it to move in a different way than we expected or anticipated. And so because of their mathematical calculations, they began to look for another planet beyond Uranus. And voila, we have Neptune. Now, what is very interesting, and this is quite telling about the character of Neptune actually as well, what is very interesting is that Galileo had observed Neptune back in 1612. He didn't realize that Neptune was a planet. I don't know what he thought it was, but he didn't sort of put two and two together and think, there's another planet out there. So Galileo had observed Neptune, and this was a whole 234 years before the discovery of Neptune. Now, why I say this correlates to sort of the ambiguous nature of Neptune is that he's a bit slippery as a planet. It's hard to sort of pin down. So here was Galileo observing Neptune, not realizing what he was, not sort of seeing it for what it was, basically sort of under an illusion that Neptune was something else. That is a very Neptunian quality, which we'll talk about very soon. But 234 years later, we had the discovery of Neptune in the real through that mathematical observation that I was talking about. This was in 1846. Now, most people know that when we discover new planets, there is often a rise in consciousness or an increase in conscious awareness in humanity on the Earth at the time of the discovery of a new planet. For example, when Uranus was discovered, we had a number of revolutions occurring around the world. What does Uranus correlate to? It correlates to freedom, liberation, equality, and equal distribution of resources. And what were these revolutions about all around the world? Well, namely, the French Revolution was occurring when Uranus was discovered. And that was about no more let them eat cake kind of stuff, no more of the aristocracy living in opulent luxury beyond compare, while the poor people of the land went hungry and could barely clothe and feed themselves. And of course, Uranus, sorry to diverge off Neptune, but Uranus is all about those things, equality. And so the conscious awareness of the planet had reached a point where it was like, no, now hang on, we're not going to take this inequality anymore. We want things to be fairer. We want things to be more even. And lo and behold, at the discovery of Uranus, which rules those things, the consciousness was ripe and ready to embrace that as part of its awareness. Now, the same occurs with Neptune, who was discovered a little while after, as I said, in 1846. So what was the expansion of consciousness that occurred at the time Neptune was discovered? Well, we had an invention of photography that had occurred sort of 20 years before. Now, when we're talking about these big planetary discoveries, this is no mediocre discovery. This is really kick-ass stuff. And so we look at the surrounding sort of, 20, 30 years as an era of the discovery of Neptune. Keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, that up until the discovery of Uranus in the late 1700s, there had the existence of planets beyond what you could see with the naked eye was not known, was not proven. And so for thousands of years, the consciousness of humanity had been in a state where it was only aware of what it could see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. In the real, in the earthly dimension. If you couldn't see beyond Saturn, then there were no planets beyond Saturn. And then all of a sudden, at the discovery of Uranus, boom, we have an awareness of more. And so Uranus was discovered, and then Neptune was discovered. And so the surrounding sort of 30 odd years in the vicinity of 1846 when Neptune was discovered are Neptunian times. And so we look at what was unfolding in consciousness then. And as I've just said a moment ago, photography. Photography was discovered. Neptune rules photography. Motion pictures were discovered 30 years or so after the discovery of Neptune. And Neptune rules motion pictures. The spiritualist movements were unfolding around the world. We started to find people who were interested in sort of hypnosis and mesmerism, people who would be, looking at channeling, people who wanted to conduct seances. These sorts of things started to come into vogue as parlor games, as did the tarot card readings and even astrological readings as sort of, like I said, parlor games, entertainment at fancy people's dinner parties and so on. That was the very glamorous side of Neptunian times, using those spiritualist things as entertainments for glamorous people. Plastics were discovered around this time. Braille for the blind, writing for the blind. Antiseptics. Pasteurization was discovered and started to be used. And these are just a few of the advancements that occurred in society around the time that Neptune was discovered. We also had cultural movements like Romanticism, the poets, Byron and Shelley around this time as well. We had, alongside Byron and Shelley, we had things like the Frankenstein novel or the Dracula novel, which is a very interesting thing. Impressionism was also the painting style en vogue around this era of history. And we also had the Communist Manifesto that was written. Now, some people, if you're not familiar with politics, the name communism can conjure up all sorts of negative imagery in your head. But the idea behind communism was a bit like Uranus in that it was about equality and compassion to everybody. So these are combinations of both Uranian themes, which is equality, and sort of an even playing field for everybody. And also Neptune, which is highly compassionate, wanting everybody to get an opportunity. And of course, Neptune, for those who we haven't got to this point yet, but Neptune rules idealism as well. So the ideal of the Communist Manifesto was present in these Neptunian times as well. Whether it actually functioned and worked was another matter, but the ideal was there. A utopian vision for society is what Neptune is all about, and so there's no surprise that we had movements in that direction towards that ideal at this time. Back to the astronomy, Neptune is a planet that's made up of liquid and ice. And it's also full of different gases as well. So it's quite a combination, Neptune, of many things. But it's very similar in its size and its structure to its nearest planet, which is Uranus. They're almost twin-like in many senses, even though they function very differently astrologically. Like Uranus, Neptune is actually circled by some very faint rings of dust. Uranus's rings are more visible, but Neptune does have rings as well, very light, very faint rings around Neptune. If you've seen images of Neptune that were taken, I think it was by the Voyager space probe, I may be wrong there, but if memory serves me, I think it was Voyager that took images of Neptune, you'll know that it's this beautiful, serene, blue-looking planet that has some wafting sort of white, they look like clouds, around it occasionally. And despite its very serene-looking surface, it is quite a wild planet underneath. So again, that illusionary factor there. On the surface, it looks like it's cool, calm, collected, and underneath, it's not what it seems. On Neptune, winds whip around the planet at, I have to read this, 2,100 kilometers an hour, and they're furious winds. Not only that, Neptune takes only 16 hours to do a rotation. It's heaps bigger than Earth, Neptune, lots bigger than Earth. And we take 24 hours as an Earth to rotate. But if you're a monstrous sized planet and you're spinning, doing a circuit of 16 hours, then the gravitational pull of Neptune becomes pretty phenomenal, despite the fact that you're mostly made up of gas. So this momentum of the gravitational force from the spin and the winds that whip around Neptune sort of whips up all the ice, methane, hydrogen, helium, and ammonia. Had to read that list to make sure I got the chemicals right. Whips it all up into a big slushy mess. So it's not this pure ethereal kind of atmosphere or body of Neptune. It's actually a bit of a slushy wild mess when you get down to it. Now, some scientists, and this is very interesting, some scientists have hypothesized, just through their calculations and observations, that the core of Neptune, which is burning iron, very fiery, very hot core, they have hypothesized that there is a layer of diamond, liquid diamond, that encircles the core of Neptune. Now, just how they've reached that conclusion, don't ask me, but it is there in scientific journals that this is a hypothesis that could prove true and correct. Now, this iron core that's burning hot, white hot iron core, is actually bigger than the Earth. So the core, the solid mass, if you like, of Neptune is larger than the Earth, and it burns at about, or its temperature is about 5,000 degrees Celsius. So it's incredibly hot, even though it's so far from the sun and distant from the sun's rays, which is usually where heat comes from in the solar system. This Neptune has its own heat source through this burning iron core. So you're getting the picture? We have this impression of Neptune, of serenity on the outside astronomically, but not quite what it seems deep down. And again, we'll see that represented when we start talking about the astrology of Neptune and how it impacts us, and therefore how it's going to impact us when it travels through each house. We also can see that it is a very fluid type planet. It's, slushy, slippery, and of course Neptune rules the watery depths of the ocean, if you're familiar with mythology and the title of Neptune. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. I love the analogy that we're seeing here of this watery fluid planet, but it has a solidness at the core and a preciousness, the liquid diamond. There's something precious at the core of Neptune. Now, Neptune, as we've already stated, is invisible. You cannot see Neptune out on a fine stargazing night. You will always need a telescope to see Neptune. And as the old Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below. The way things appear in the sky from our vantage point on Earth is exactly how they will play out and be represented and reflected in our lives on the planet. What does that mean? Well, it means that the planets we can see with the naked eye, the visible planets, in astrology, they correlate and connect to what we experience visibly, tangibly, experientially on the Earth. Our touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. You know, the physical things of the experience of being a body incarnate on the Earth connect to visible planets and what they rule. When you get to Neptune, actually when you get to Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, they're all invisible without a telescope, and therefore they connect to the inner realm of the psyche, what motivates us unconsciously, you know, our behavioral patterns, our things we can't help about ourselves, you know, our deep psychological wounds and our karmas that we carry with us at the core of our self, at our soul level. They correspond to these invisible planets because as above, so below. We can't see them, therefore it's like the part of the iceberg that sits underneath the water. You can't see it, but it's still there packing a whopping punch, especially if you happen to be on the Titanic. So Neptune has at least 14 moons that circle it. It has a greater and denser gravity than the Earth. So if you're standing on Neptune, you will weigh a lot more than you do on the Earth. And it takes longer than one lifetime for Neptune to circle the sun. It takes 165 years. So in your lifetime, you will never see Neptune return to its natal place in your astrological chart. You just won't live that long, at least not in this day and age as I'm recording this video. Who knows what science might do in the future, but right now you won't live to be 165 and see Neptune come back to its natal position. Let's explore Neptune mythologically now. Well, Neptune is the name of the Roman god of the sea. Not only the sea though, in the oceans, but also of freshwater. Neptune was the Roman god of freshwater as well. And we often see Neptune in mythological pictorial representation with his trident. And of course, what is the symbol of Neptune astrologically? It's a trident. So there we go. There's so much correlation between the mythologies and what plays out in the skies again here. So again, there's no coincidences that when the astronomers discovered Neptune, they didn't know that it was made mostly of liquid and gas. They didn't know it was mostly a fluid planet. But lo and behold, here we are. They gave it the name Neptune, king of the oceans, and Neptune is quite an oceanic planet with its liquid mass. Once again, this is showing us how the conscious awareness works, even in unconscious ways. Now, a little bit more about Neptune mythologically was that he was the son of the Titan god Saturn. Now, along with Neptune, there was Jupiter and there was Pluto that were the sons of Saturn. And Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto didn't really get along with Saturn very well. If you're familiar with the mythology of Saturn and Jupiter, you'll know that the mother of Jupiter hid him away because Saturn had a habit of eating his children lest they rise up against him and take over. So theoretically, in the mythology, Neptune and Pluto were gobbled up by their father Saturn. But then along came Jupiter when he was all grown up to the rescue, and Saturn regurgitated his offspring, Neptune and Pluto. There were others as well, but the main ones were Neptune and Pluto, the brothers of Jupiter. And together, Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto overthrew their father Saturn, and Jupiter became king of the gods. And we had the reign of the Olympian gods from that point on, which include Neptune and Pluto. So Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto are the Olympian gods. Saturn was the Titan god. And Uranus, who was the father of Saturn, just to confuse matters even further, was not a Titan and not an Olympian. He was sort of one of the forefathers of them all. In ancient Greece and Rome, they celebrated the role of water in their lives, and they had a festival to celebrate this, and it was known as Neptunalia. There was also another festival that occurred at the similar time called Ferinalia. I won't go into the mythology of that name, but they were both celebrated around the same time. So July 23rd and July 25th, the role of water and the preciousness of water in life was celebrated with these festivals. So Neptunalia, it was a time of honoring the god Neptune and its watery association. So let's take a peek at the astrology of Neptune. I'm going to tell you all about Neptune astrologically. What is Neptune about? Well, as we've already come across, Neptune is about illusion, seeing something and actually realizing it's something else. It's not what it seems. So that can be a number of things can be displayed that way. Glamour is ruled by Neptune, because if you're glamorous, you've got amazing makeup and hair and beautiful, shimmering, gorgeous clothes and stuff. You look very glamorous, but is that who you really are? When you wake up in bed in the morning, and your hair's a tousled mess and you haven't got makeup on and you're wearing your baggy old t-shirt, you might not look glamorous. So glamour is ruled by Neptune because it's part of that deception, if you like, but not a bad deception. It's just a deception. It's not what it seems. Neptune, in that sense, rules glamour. Neptune, as we've already discussed, rules a desire to return to utopia, to achieve utopia, to create heaven on earth, so to speak. So that can be a very positive thing if we're wanting to make the world a better place. And Neptune is also quite a compassionate planet. There is a lot of unconditional love that goes along with Neptune, brotherly love, the idea of anyone can be saved from their horrible life or, their difficulties or their own ill choices in life. Neptune has this sort of unconditional love. Some might refer to that as this redeemer quality about it. And Neptune can be connected to miracles as well, because if somebody is raised up from the muck and mire into a wonderful life, well, that is often seen as a miracle. And that transformation that occurs is a very Neptunian associated thing in astrology. Part of this desire for utopia can actually have connections to a longing to escape the horror and the harshness of earthly reality. And those of us who are very Neptunian, who have a strong Neptune in our chart, or even a strong 12th house or a strong Pisces, will know what this is all about. The wanting to escape from earth and earth realities because they're too hard to bear. They're fearful. Earth is a fearful place for these highly sensitive Neptunian, Piscean, 12th house souls, and it's almost too hard. So Neptune is also associated with tremendous longing to tap out, to escape, a longing to go to heaven. Now you'll see a lot of religious groups, fanatical religious groups going down this road where it doesn't matter what I endure in this lifetime, I will be rewarded when I go to heaven. And that's all they're living for. They don't even engage in earthly reality and earthly life because it's only about heaven and getting to heaven after this horrible life is over. That's a Neptunian thing. Also, Neptune has this idea about it of wanting to return to the watery depths, i.e. the womb, being in the embryonic fluid, being safe and secure, not having to sort of struggle and make it on our own because, hey, we've got everything we need. We're warm, we're safe, we're fed, we're in the womb. And Neptune has this desire for that too. So it's a dual desire for paradise, heaven, but also at the same time a desire to, return to the safety and security of home, so to speak. Neptune can also give a longing to be saved. You want your hero to come along and rescue you from this, terrible existence. That's a Neptunian longing. But also, if we find that we desire to be the rescuer, we want to be somebody's hero, that's a Neptunian thing as well. So there's often a spiritual connection with Neptune, and I'm sure from what I've just described, you can see connections in religious circles to savior mentality, redeemer qualities, longing for paradise. You can see where Neptune's getting its sort of shadow side of spirituality popping up there in religious, ideology. But Neptune is also in the positive side which I love to talk about more, is the beautiful connection to angelic realms, to the divine. So if we channel higher wisdom, higher knowledge, that's a Neptune thing. If we're channeling creativity, beauty, art, if we're channeling unconditional love. And now I'm talking about channeling here, not in the sort of, some entity speaking through me, although that is a Neptunian thing. I'm talking about simply expressing things that come from beyond us. Beautiful things, gracious things, ethereal things, things that come from beyond the earthly plane. That spiritual side of Neptune is so beautiful. So Neptune is the manifestation of divine love, divine grace, and divine creativity, divine creative ideals. He is connected to visualization, imagination, and even healing through visualization and imagination. The idea that through your thought processes and lifting them to a higher plane, dreaming and aspiring of what it could be, that you can heal yourself. And again, we come back to the miraculous component here, where people are miraculously healed. Neptune has connections to hypnosis as well, and mesmerism. In fact, Mesmer was the man who developed the idea of being hypnotized as a form of healing. So the two are very similar. And so Neptune has connections with this as well. It's all very interesting, but Neptune is actually a planet that it's hard to define him, and I use the word him loosely, as a masculine planet. Now, Neptune as a god was a masculine god, but the expression of Neptune is actually very feminine. It errs on the feminine side. So it would be very interesting to understand exactly how they reached the concept in ancient mythology that Neptune, the god of the oceans, was actually a man. I feel maybe that came about at the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans, when the patriarchy was establishing itself, because really the expression of Neptune is this compassionate, unconditionally loving, highly creative energy, which connects more to the water signs and the watery energy, which is feminine in astrology. So very interesting there. Neptune is a more feminine energy expression. Neptune rules the sign of Pisces in modern astrology, and of course that is a water sign as well. Neptune is also in astrology neither benefic nor malefic. So that means, we don't put a label of good or bad on him. But really with Neptune, it depends what aspects you have to your placement of Neptune in the chart, whether he will manifest his shadow side or whether he will manifest his light side in your life. And we've kind of talked a little bit about both here now. I will talk further about the shadow side in just a second. But if you have mostly good aspects, like a conjunction, we can classify that as a good aspect, or perhaps a trine or a sextile to Neptune from other planets, then it's looking good for you. Neptune will tend to express in its more angelic form. It's more miraculous, blessed form. But if you have quite a mixed bag, maybe you've got some squares to your Neptune, maybe you've got some oppositions to your Neptune. If that's what it's looking like, then you may end up with a bit more of the shadow side exhibiting in your personality or what you attract in your life. Let's explore what that is all about. Well, some of the shadow side of Neptune is in the desire for utopia. We want to see evil people punished. And you'll see this a lot expressing in religions, where we just want everyone who's bad to go to hell. And that's actually a shadow Neptunian energy, because we want to preserve utopia for the pure, and everyone else can suffer, So that's a shadow side expression of Neptune. Narcissism can be connected with Neptune's shadow side as well. And so can masochism, actually. If we think about this desire to be seen as holy and pure, often that connects to making ourselves falsely humble and lower than another person. And that can incite in another person distaste, and disgust for another person who is falsely humble. And of course, if you're familiar with the idea of masochism, then you know that it's about debasing yourself in order that you might feel more worthy or more holy because you've made yourself lowly. It's a very slippery, shall we say, concept. And again, not everything is as it seems. It might seem with someone who is in a masochist state that they don't care about themselves, that they don't love themselves, that they're being cruel to themselves. But very often under the surface is this energy of wanting, the best way I can describe it, to be pure through making yourself lowly, like the flagellants did in ancient medieval times through whipping themselves. Oh, they're so pure and holy because they're whipping themselves for Christ. It's that kind of idea. Odd one, but not everything is as it seems with Neptune and Neptune's shadow side. Projection is something that is actually a Neptunian behavioral quality coming from this psychological depth. If we have separation anxiety, that's a shadow side of Neptune. Of course it is, because we are longing to return to the womb. And when we're separate from that safe space, separation anxiety. So if you're looking at those psychological issues in a chart and, assessing that, look at Neptune and what Neptune's doing in the chart. Shadow side of Neptune can be idealization, where we don't see a person clearly for who they are, but we put them on a pedestal. So celebrity culture would be one expression of that. Anyone we put on a pedestal and hold up there, and we create an illusion around that person. It's not the truth. It's not real. It's not what is really going on at the core of a person, to have them up on a pedestal and think that, oh my God, they're so perfect. That's idealization, and that's Neptune shadow side, as is hysteria, as is addiction. Addiction's another expression here. And why? Because addiction is escapism. If we're addicted to drugs, usually with Neptune involved, it's because we want to get away from the harshness of reality. If we're addicted to alcohol, again, it's an escape mechanism and it's an escape valve, but not a healthy one, because reality is too harsh and we just long to get out of here. Obviously, deception is a shadow side of Neptune, because if you're creating an illusion, while there can be sort of times when that's good, as in the case of glamour and that's fun and what have you, sometimes when we are creating an illusion, we're deceiving others. We're pulling the wool over their eyes. We're not being our true self, and that is a shadow Neptune expression. Sacrifice, I would say, is a shadow Neptunian expression. Again, it comes in close context with this false humility kind of behavior. If we feel that we have to sacrifice ourselves for another person, then we're kind of making ourselves to be better than the other person. I'll go in, I'll sacrifice myself, and then that person will be saved. And there's a false humility about it, a deceptive humility that goes along with that. And of course, oftentimes when people have strong Neptune representations in the chart, they lose themselves, they martyr themselves for the sake of another. Does that benefit their life? No, usually. But it might make them feel spiritually greater, or that they have been a noble person. Again, we've got this sacrifice energy that's a bit not what it seems, and this is also the shadow side of Neptune. Victimization. Victimization is another Neptunian energy, where poor me, I am suffering because life has been unkind, and therefore I am longing to get away from life, and return to the womb or go to paradise because I have been victimized. Instead of being our own savior, instead of making the best of things and doing what we can to transform our karma, no, we're a victim and we just want to escape. That's so Neptunian shadow side. Especially, you could call it suffering that's seen as purity. So these are some of the Neptunian shadow energies. I don't want to leave it on that though. There are good things, obviously, that Neptune correlates to. We've talked about some of these, but, others might be the belief that there's enough for everybody, and that the universe can be kind and the universe has our back. In fact, transcendence of matter is a very big Neptunian theme. The belief that eventually good will win over evil. That's Neptunian as well. Jesus' teachings were very Neptunian. He was, after all, the avatar for the age of Pisces, which was ruled by Neptune. So compassion, unconditional love. We've talked about that. Forgiveness, healing, all these things, divine healing, miraculous healing. These are Neptunian ruled things. So Jesus was a big representation of Neptune energy in the positive. The most creative and artistic planet. We've already talked about that. And it's actually at its strongest capacity in water signs. So Neptune does very well in Pisces, Cancer, or Scorpio. She will tend to give the best results if that's where he is in your natal chart, but also if that's where he's transiting at any given time, he's going to give the better side of himself to you. Neptune rules the color light blue. Hence, I have my blue blouse on here today for this video, but I've also worn my very well, you might not be able to see it because the color in this camera doesn't actually come up that good. I need to get a new camera, but it's actually a very beautiful velvet jacket that's ocean color, like the kind of tranquil turquoise that we see up on the beaches of Queensland or some beautiful tropical beaches. And I thought, seeing as Neptune rules these gorgeous oceans, I would wear my beautiful aqua turquoise color velvet jacket with my light blue Neptunian top. Neptune can also have connections to lavender, purpley colors also. Hence, we see often people who work in spiritual, sort of new agey fields have a lot of purple going on, because often they might not be aware of this even, but they're probably highly Neptunian people. They have a strong Neptune in their chart, and so the purple element tends to come through quite a lot, and you'll see a lot of, websites and stuff with purple this and lavender that on many spiritual sites. Neptune rules the gemstone amethyst as well, and so amethyst has a lot of qualities to it that correlate very strongly to Neptune. Some tangible things, and I did say in the beginning Neptune's more psychological. Yep, that's true, very true, but Neptune does have some governance of certain items on the planet, namely because of what was happening at the time Neptune was discovered, what things were starting to be used and utilized when Neptune was discovered, and therefore Neptune gets the rulership of those things. So the ocean, obviously, but oils, plastics, impressionism, film, photography, advertising, poisons, escapism, that's not actually a tangible thing, but that's obviously something Neptune rules, drugs. As I've already illustrated, a lot of these things were being discovered. Film, photography, medications, the shipping industry, steam-powered ships were really starting to get a Guernsey around the time that Neptune came along. So shipping and the oceans, all of these things, highly Neptunian. Now, in my level 1 astrology course that is coming out, you can learn more about Neptune and the things Neptune rules, and we go into greater depth with Neptune there and its rulerships. So if you're interested in knowing more, check out that course. But what does Neptune want? It wants unwavering trust, unwavering love, an unwavering belief that the divine will come through for you. Even in the face of no evidence at all, Neptune wants us to believe. If you are 40 odd years old and you've never had a boyfriend, Neptune is saying, keep believing and the miracle can happen. And I would encourage you, if that's the case, well, wait till you're 42. Who knows? Neptune, when it reaches its maturation at 42, may just bring you what you've been waiting for. So that's a short look at the beautiful and quite intriguing and unusual planet of Neptune. Now let's have a look at what Neptune is all about when he travels through a house in the horoscope and what he's going to do for you while he's there. So how do we find out if Neptune is transiting in our 11th house? Well, it's really very simple. You just need to count 11 houses from your rising sign, your ascendant, and in whole sign astrology, wherever your ascendant falls is your first house. Let's have an example. I'm going to use Neptune in the sign of Pisces to tell us, as an illustration. So if we are looking for a transit of Neptune to the 11th house, we could go to a website like planetwatcher.com where we would see where Neptune is currently transiting, in what sign. You'd look for the glyph of the trident, which is Neptune's symbol, and see what sign it's currently in at any given point in time. And then we would, if we knew our rising sign, we would be able to work out how many houses from our rising sign Neptune currently was. Now, if Neptune was transiting the sign of Pisces, we would look at, in this illustration, Taurus as the rising sign to find Neptune moving through the 11th house. We do this because we count from the ascendant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 houses in whole sign astrology. So if you're a Taurus rising person and Neptune is currently transiting through Pisces, you are on the right video with this one. Now, Neptune takes 14 years to move through any given sign, so it's going to be quite a while before you'll see Neptune move into a different house, but make sure that you check in every now and again, and then you can refer to the video that's appropriate for you at any point in time. So what is the 11th house all about? Well, it covers a lot of territory, actually. It's a very auspicious house. It's an upachaya house, a house that gives better results the longer that we deal with our lives or process through our lives. It's a house of friendships and networks. It's a house of groups and group involvements, community, the collective, society at large. It's a house of where we belong, where we feel we fit. It's a house of our hopes and wishes and our goals and dreams. It's a house of vision and progress. It's a house of rewards and gains for the efforts that we put into our life. And it's also a house of going beyond our ego identity, being part of something greater than ourselves, hence the link to humanitarianism. The opposite house, just for those who don't know, the opposite house from the 11th house is the 5th house, which is all about our ego identity. And of course, when something is opposite, we go to the polaric. And the polaric is 11th house, the loss of ego identity for the sake of something bigger than just ourselves. So how does Neptune affect all these themes that are 11th house based? Well, let's start with the dreams and visions and goals. During this 14-year period, we may become more idealistic and filled with great hope regarding our dreams and goals and visions. And so whatever we fantasize about, whatever we dream about accomplishing, it suddenly becomes more in our head attainable to us. And we lose ourselves in our daydreams about the visions, the goals, the dreams, the aspirations that we have for life. In fact, we really develop strong visualization capacity when Neptune is in the 11th house. We can see clearly in our mind's eye what life would look like if our dream, goal, vision, aspiration came to fruition. And we tend to lose, with Neptune here, we tend to lose a bit of fear of success, or doubt of success. Sometimes we self-sabotage our own dreams and goals out of fear or out of lack of faith. But with Neptune here, planet that has to do with great spiritual leanings, we find that is no longer a barrier. We no longer, inhibit our faith or buy into the fears that might otherwise be present regarding our dreams and goals and aspirations. So in that sense, it can be very fulfilling. Obviously, if we're feeling that way, we can become really enthusiastic and optimistic about what is actually possible in our lives and what we can achieve. So I would encourage you, if you're having this transit, take regular time to visualize, take regular time to imagine and daydream about what could be, what your life could look like. And I remember back to when I had Neptune transiting here many years ago, it was a wonderful experience. And I would fill book after book after book with dreams and goals and aspirations and really start to go into the fantasy realm. It wasn't such a good transit for practical outworkings and manifestation, but the dream life was huge regarding what I could achieve and what my life could look like. It was a very happy time, very fulfilling time, if only in my fantasy life and perhaps not so much in the material reality. But we do find that we're more open to opportunities because of this energy that now resides within us. And when opportunities come along, we're not afraid to take the leap, the leap of faith required to enter into a new opportunity or step through a new open door. Now, of course, there's shadow and light in everything, and the shadow side of this component is that we may not be very logical about what we do and what we're aspiring to. We might dream of being the next Oprah Winfrey, but the reality is we couldn't speak in front of a microphone if our lives depended on it. So we can find that there's a little bit of a disconnect between our material circumstances and what we're dreaming of and aspiring to. we tend to lack a bit of logic about our visions, and we may also lack a bit of logic about the steps required to achieve what we want to achieve. Neptune is also not renowned for paying attention to details, so often to achieve our goals and dreams we need to deal with the fine detail, and Neptune kind of doesn't give a lot of time to that when he's transiting the 11th house. We've got the big grand vision and goal and utopian ideal, but the minute detail and the tasks required kind of go a bit by the wayside, and we get lost in the dream rather than the practical reality. What's the result of this? Well, it can lead to disappointment and disillusion. You know, I recall myself when I went through this particular transit, and I would have all these dreams for, well, I was very geared towards home and family life at that stage of my life, and dreams for what it should look like and what it should be. And when I was not able to materially manifest things in the manner that I longed to do and the manner that I thought was spiritually correct in the universe, I was very disappointed, and my illusions about family and home and so forth were quite shattered. So it's not an easy transit in that light. Great for dreaming and visualizing and fantasizing and creating goals, but not so fantastic when it comes to the reality. So it is a better transit for investing in your visions and your aspirations with your mind and your imagination, rather than expecting to see things manifest. That might happen under different transits. Maybe a transit of Saturn or a transit of Jupiter, things might manifest for you. And perhaps when Neptune moves on from the 11th house, you might start to see those visions and goals and dreams start to materialize in the reality, in the practical world you live in. What about humanitarianism and group involvements? Well, what does Neptune do to those realms of the 11th house? Well, we tend to find that we dream of a utopian world for all, and we want love and we want benefit to flow to everybody because we're all embracing. And Neptune is very compassionate, and the 11th house is all about how can we make humanity, the group, the collective experience on Earth better. So we visualize about that, we dream about that, we have this utopian ideal. We feel great compassion for all of humanity under this transit, and we want to help, we want to heal, we want to restore and make the world as beautiful as it could be. And because of this, we might find ourselves actually involved in more humanitarian and charity type work. We might, I remember again when I was going through this transit, I started a Bible study group because that was the zone I was in at the time, and we would do a lot of activities to help uplift, to create community, to make the world a better place as a group. So you might find that you start a group like that, or not necessarily a religious group, but you start a group that's all about helping the homeless, or you get involved in some activity that's to do with the prevention of cruelty to animals or something. You might find that you just really get involved in some humanitarian and compassionate work in some way. And of course our motives tend to be altruistic with Neptune here as well. Any spiritual movements, any mystical ideals that are all about uplifting the soul and the spiritual state become very, very attractive to us under this influence. So we might find that we join a group, we start a group, as I've already illustrated, or we seek out like-minded people who are on that same spiritual journey and hungering for that spiritual uplift that we are under this transit. We want to connect, we want to belong with people like that. Remember, Neptune also blows out the boundaries. Neptune has no boundaries. So we become boundaryless with our dreams and aspirations for the benefit of larger society. One of the dreams that I had during this time was I wanted to start at that time, because I was quite religious, a Bible school. I have been to Bible school. I have a degree from Bible college. And I had this aspiration to start something like that would be more accessible to people in my part of the world who wanted to go into a spiritual learning program like that. These days I'd do something very different, but that's where I was at the time. I had these grandiose visions for what I wanted to do with my life to bless and uplift and, bring greater good to humanity. At the time I was in my early 20s, and, the likelihood of being able to accomplish that in my 20s was very far-fetched, and so I had this no boundary approach to how I wanted to help and heal and uplift humanity. But our social consciousness is quite attuned during this transit. We're tapped into that. We're sensitive to the needs of the collective. What is going to benefit the collective? What is going to uplift the collective? What can heal the collective? And we're really, zoned into those kinds of energies. And because Neptune is longing, we may find ourselves longing to be part of a collective group. That could be a spiritual group or a humanitarian group, but we long for it. We long for that bonding with like-minded people over the compassion or the altruism or the spiritual or the mystical in some way. We want a meaningful collective endeavor to be a part of. Now, of course, there's a shadow side to this as well, and you may very well guess what this might look like. We may find people during a Neptune transit to the 11th house joining cults, joining subcultures where they feel like they belong and there's unity there, but it might be a little bit off. It might be deceptive. It might pull the wool over their eyes. It might be a bit illusionary and not all that it's cracked up to be. We might join fanciful subcultures as well, like Neptune is to wear a persona, to wear a mask, to not quite be real. You might join a subculture that likes to sort of put on an image or a mask, like a rockabilly culture or a steampunk culture. Those sorts of things would fit that bill. You might also join some bohemian society, an artistic culture, an alternative mystical group of some sort, or some utopian collective. Now that can be obviously a more fun and a bit more less dangerous, shall we say, manifestation of that energy. Now, if we feel that we don't belong, that we're a loner, that we're an outsider, it can be very hard during this transit because the desire to belong is very strong when Neptune is in the 11th house. And if we are feeling that way, if we feel like we don't belong to society at large in some manner, it can leave us feeling very lost and very lonely. So if you are feeling lost and lonely during this transit, get your skates on and go out and try and find a group of like-minded people where you can connect and bond, because that's what's missing with this transit. Now it's really interesting. Neptune was transiting the sign of Aquarius, which has similar energy to the 11th house, at the time that Thomas More wrote his book Utopia. No coincidences there. And we also had Neptune in Aquarius at the time that Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto. Ideals for the collective, visions for the collective. No coincidences with that. Let's lighten things up a bit. What about friendships? This is a house of friendships after all. Now, because Neptune is like a fog and a mist coming in and it's infiltrating, it's not sudden fireworks, it's slow and a bit underhanded if you would want to use that terminology, it's infiltrating, then you may notice that over the 14-year period that your friendship circles are changing subtly. But where you begin with your friends at the beginning of this transit will not be where you'll end up. Your friendship circles are likely to go through some quite significant changes. You may find that your old friends start behaving very differently in subtle ways, but as the 14-year period goes on, you'll notice it more and more. Your old friends might become more spiritual, more mystical. They might behave more compassionately, might be more charitable. These are the higher expressions of Neptune coming through your friends after all. Some of your friends might suddenly start to take up some sort of creative endeavors and they've never been interested in creative activity before, and suddenly here they are writing poetry or making films. They're the higher manifestations, but the lower manifestation is that you might suddenly find that some of your friends might start lying to you, cheating you, deceiving you in some way, where the shadow side of Neptune begins to come through. Some friends may even start to become addicted to sex, addicted to alcohol, addicted to chocolate. Like they might start displaying some seriously problematic behaviors. Some friends might actually tap out of society completely. They might go and live on a mountaintop in Tibet for the whole 14-year period and you don't see them because they've actually escaped from ordinary mundane reality in some way. So if you find that your friends are escaping in healthy ways, be grateful, be glad for them. They're going through a very important spiritual experience. If you find that your friends are tapping out in unhealthy ways, I would offer your compassion to your friends. Neptune in the 11th house would do such a thing. And of course, I'm not talking about the whole duration of this 14-year period. There will be seasons where this is stronger seen, where friends are tapping out. There may be seasons when they're not, but you will notice these changes in your friendship circles over the duration of this 14-year period. You might also create some new friends, which is wonderful. Friends that are bohemian, mystical, artistic, friends that are spiritual, and maybe healers as well. And what this is drawing you to have a meeting of mind and spirit with others. So you start to connect on a spiritual plane, or a creative plane, or an artistic plane, or a bohemian lifestyle plane. You start to connect with others and create new friendship circles with people like that. You start to create friendships with people who have a shared ideal, shared interests. It's actually a beautiful transit for friendships, I feel. You end up with a more refined expression of friendship. And remember that Neptune at its highest manifestation is unconditional love. It's embracing of everyone. And really that would be the most wonderful way to express this Neptune transiting the 11th house, where you are unconditionally loving of everyone and drawing people with a spiritual energy just like yours to you. Again, we need to talk about the shadow side of Neptune here with friends, and there may be an expectation of unconditional love from your friends, and that can be very claustrophobic when you are constantly demanding of your friends too much, more than they're willing to give, and expecting that they are going to be unconditionally loving towards you. Now, it's fine if you want to give unconditional love. That's your prerogative if you want to do that. But expecting other people to give that to you is very detrimental and usually leads to disappointment and disillusionment and claustrophobia for your friends. Remember, Neptune can actually be quite a possessive energy. It wants to to have and longs to obtain something. So be very aware of that in your friendships. The other shadow expression of Neptune in the 11th house is that you can feel that you need to save your friends in some way. Oh, a friend's addicted to drugs. I'm going to go in there. They're going to live with me and I'm going to take care of them and make sure they stay away from the drugs. And you become a martyr for your friends. Don't go there. That is the shadow expression of Neptune. Allow people the right to live the lives they need to live. Don't become the fanatic or the zealot or the extremist regarding, salvation for others. You do not have to be the savior for your friends, even though Neptune here may prompt you in that direction. And because of this energy, if you're in that shadow zone, you may feel that, or you may find that you are creating friendships with people who need saving. Growing up in Christian churches, I saw this a lot. There was a lot of, we must be missionaries to the unsaved, the lower socioeconomic, the poor people of our town, and we will save them and bring them into our community, our collective, our church. And that happened a lot. That is actually a shadow expression of Neptune. Yeah, be kind. Yeah, be compassionate. Yeah, reach out. But it's this, I must save them from their wrong thinking, their wrong behaviors. You don't have to save them. You just have to give love. So I'm on my preachy bandwagon here, but there is this shadow side of Neptune. We see it in religion quite a lot, and it can exhibit with your friends during this transit. The need to save others or be a savior or creating friendships with people who need saving. Be forewarned and forearmed and consciously aware of going down that shadow side of the Neptune path. And that's the essence of Neptune transiting through the 11th house. I hope this helps you in your journey for this 14-year period. And remember, when you get to the end of that 14-year period, do check out Neptune transiting through your 12th video to be forewarned and forearmed there as well.